How are you feeling under those hoods? A little hot? President Holloway, thank you for that. I'm incredibly honored today. Distinguished faculty, administrators, and guests, and parents, grandparents, everyone, welcome and congratulations. Congratulations above all to you, the class of 2022. Now, some of you may still be suffering a little bit from last night, like you. You might have gotten an early start on the celebrating, but we're going to let that slide today. You've earned it. An occasion like this is absolutely thrilling. For sure, it's you, the graduates, who do the loudest cheering, and at some point you'll toss those extremely weird hats in the air. Fair enough. But to echo President Holloway, you guys are only the second happiest constituency here today. I faintly remember my own graduation, but I remember vividly, moment to moment, every sensation of my kids' graduations. And what you want for your kids is to see them on their feet, in graduation robes, if that's in the cards, healthy, independent, full of promise, and if possible, out the door. That seems to happen less and less these days. The feeling of accomplishment, of relief, the pride your elders feel today is indescribable. So all of you graduates, please give it up for your folks, for your relatives, your elders, and your teachers right this very second. And some of you graduates faced early hardships, some event, some condition that doesn't conform to the cartoon of idyllic childhood or adolescence, economic barriers, social and political barriers. In so many ways, life does not necessarily make it easy for you to get here or to finish. Let that be noted. What's more, absolutely all of you, without exception, faced a pandemic that cut into your experience here in ways that you couldn't have anticipated. It's amazing to think that this is the first commencement at Rutgers since 2019, or in real life. I can only hope that overcoming these trials made you stronger and more resilient, that the experience reinforced in you what's most precious about the friendships that you did form, the books that you did read, the concepts you mastered, and the ambitions that you nurtured. This is a special class, the class of 22, and that should be noted too, on your diploma maybe, but at least in history. Now, let me begin with an apology. In the not-so-recent past, before the world shut down, there had been a magnificent run of speakers on this stage. Graduating classes heard from the great Toni Morrison, the poet Natasha Trethewey. And in 2016, as he was in the final months of his presidency and Rutgers was celebrating its 250th anniversary from Barack Obama. And the president, like all commencement speakers, started his address with some shameless pandering. To be specific, he tried to get in the middle of an age-old New Jersey debate. Is it pork roll or is it Taylor ham? I completely agree. Now, I really do admire the man. I even wrote a book about him, but let the record show that he ducked the question. And 4 months later, the Democrats lost the election. Draw your own conclusion. Now, I know what you're thinking. The class of 2016 got Barack Obama, and we got this guy. I really feel your pain. I do. But in my defense, I'll say this, and I'll say it proudly. I'm from New Jersey. Thank you. To be specific, exit 13. And so while the folks who are charged with selecting a commencement speaker this year failed miserably, to land someone famous this year, they at least got someone who appreciates the gas fire pollution sunsets over the power plants on the Jersey Turnpike. Yes. Someone who knows about the greatness of Vivian Stringer. Someone who understands the superiority of the Vince Lombardi service area over the Molly Pitcher service area. Those other speakers, no matter how great they may have been, never ate a fat Darryl sandwich and lived to tell the tale. Ask my cardiologist. And yes, I too am shamelessly pandering to you. But I earned it. I was born in New Jersey and I was raised here. That's right. Now, I belong to a profession, a trade, that, if you put it mildly, lacks popularity. I'm a journalist. And in the sweepstakes of popular esteem, journalists rank somewhere between telemarketers and members of the United States Congress. But while I understand that journalism is not in high esteem, I think we can all agree, in all seriousness, that you're graduating today at a particularly charged moment in history, for the individual, for the country, and for the planet. I began my life as a reporter, most seriously in the late 80s as a correspondent living in Moscow. And when I first visited the country, the experience was like arriving on the dark side of the moon. State censorship extended from film to literature, from media to the classroom. The economy was a shambles. The only true, real political discussion that took place was at the kitchen table, among the most trusted friends. In all, life was oppressive, dull, and for those who showed the least sign of independence or rebellion, cruel. As late as 1984, it was possible to believe that things would ever change. But when they did change, it happened, as they say, slowly, and then all at once. Communist ideology and then the Soviet Union itself collapsed largely because it was an unsustainable life. There was no future. The dissidents knew it, much of the population knew it, and finally a new leader of the country, Mikhail Gorbachev, acknowledged it. Как жить нельзя, he said. We can't go on living like this. And then bravely, chaotically, he acted on it. And so a people that had been throttled for so long by censorship and oppression came slowly into the light. Everything was published. Everything was said. Actual politics, messy and vital, took root. The Berlin Wall fell. Hundreds of millions of people in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and in the states of the former Soviet Union arrived at a crossroads of real democratic possibility. And in that early ecstasy of liberation, people tore down symbols of the past. They toppled the statues of old leaders and heads of the secret police. Even a foreigner like me could feel that burst of exultation. My grandfathers had been born in the Russian Empire. They were profoundly poor, victims of grinding, day-to-day anti-Semitism. And before fleeing for America, my mother-in-law spent years in a prison camp before making her way to New York as a young girl. So in Moscow, my sense of fellow feeling ran deep, and so was my optimism. The period between 1989 and 1991 was a moment of unforgettable possibility, and not only in Europe. The whole world, it seemed, was changing for the better. We saw similar democratizing trends in Latin America, in Southeast Asia. Apartheid in South Africa finally came to an end. And for a fleeting minute, before the tanks rolled in Tiananmen Square, there were even glimmers of change in China. One estimable scholar, Francis Fukuyama, was tempted to call this moment in time the end of history, the resolution of the eternal questions on how societies should arrange themselves. But that kind of optimism was outsized, and in many ways it was premature. We certainly know that now. Because here we are, sitting in central New Jersey in 2022, and no one with eyes to see and a brain to think would talk any longer about the end of history. While you're rightly thinking today about your own individual futures, the search for good and interesting work, the possibility of new relationships, while you're trying to figure out your lives as soon as you get out of these extremely hot gowns, you are confronted by quite a different world. In many ways, a darker world. Its overriding feature is fragility. So much of what we cherish, democracy, essential institutions, economic security, even the earth itself, appears fragile. Here at Rutgers, you've lived among what is one of the most diverse student bodies in the entire country. And without realizing it, the student body here could serve, without idealizing it, the student body here could and should serve as a model for so many other schools and American institutions. And yet the struggle for a greater diversity still meets with enormous resistance. That too is part of the American condition, the American fragility. President Obama's election in 2008 was a great passage in our history, a great moment. But it was not an endpoint. It was certainly not a resolution of our original sin, the terrible road from slavery to Jim Crow to the modern manifestations of racism that we know only too well. We certainly did not witness a post-racial America. And look what came after. Charlottesville, Minneapolis, and even in the White House itself, once President Obama left, a regression, a terrible regression. We saw the bubbling up, the bubbling over of a toxic strain of bigotry in this country, a strain that has always been there. We saw how fragile our institutions and our social compact, even our national sense of decency. On January 6th, we saw the fragility of American democracy up close. In a single day, we witnessed how vulnerable we are to the forces of hatred, how vulnerable our institutions are, our electoral system, and our government itself. Fragility is not only a matter of politics, it extends to the natural world. When fires sweep through California and the Pacific Northwest, when glaciers melt, we glimpse an even more fragile future. Our freedom, with all its limits, is not a natural condition, and it by no means is innately stable. Freedom is fragile. Freedom is rare. And as we've discovered so recently and so painfully, freedom is provisional. I am one of President Obama's generation, and we grew up learning and taking for granted what was called American exceptionalism, the idea that Americans were uniquely blessed and even superior. In fact, in some ways, we are truly blessed. We're blessed by the rise of a collection of Enlightenment-era statesmen who wrote a constitution that, while absolutely blind to the rights of women and the basic humanity of black men and women in America, while they were blind to all that, they at least provided us with a political and legal template for a new country that has shown it has the capacity over time to change for the better, to extend human rights to more and more of its citizens. But change comes fitfully. President Obama was fond of quoting Dr. King's favorite adage. You've heard it over and over again. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Obama liked that line because it represents both a belief in moral progress and at the same time a realism about the flaws of human beings and the terrible belatedness of change. In fact, he liked that adage so much that it was woven into his carpet in the Oval Office. When his successor came to inhabit the Oval Office, of course, that carpet was put in storage, and so was the sentiment. In our time, in your time, many of the countries that I saw liberated or on the road to liberation as a young reporter, Russia, Hungary, Brazil, the Philippines, and so many others, have gone backward toward authoritarianism. India, the biggest democracy of all, has fallen prey to extreme nationalism and an alarming degree of ethnic hatred. And if we're being honest with ourselves, we Americans have also experienced a painful regression. We're divided, we're overheated, infuriated, and in so many ways, intolerant. Polls have even shown a decreasing faith in American democracy itself. It's now a normal thing to watch a member of Congress traffic in conspiracy theories and flout what had once seemed like routine standards of democratic practice. We too have witnessed, in America, the authoritarian temptation. The question is, will we succumb to it? When he was at Rutgers in 2016, President Obama, an insistent optimist, pointed out that those who look with nostalgia at the idyllic America of the past ignore some pretty basic facts. The good old days were better for whom exactly? America today is immensely more diverse than it was. Doors that were shut to so many are now at least more open than they were. We're healthier. We live longer. Our universities like Rutgers, are without equal abroad. In our better moments, we have passed measures for marriage equality, for equal pay. There has been progress. And yet even he had to acknowledge that our country, our ideals, remained unrealized and under threat. Look at where we are with Roe, look at where we are with marriage equality. We have not truly achieved our country and its promise. Far too many Americans are left behind and left out. In his attempt to reassure us, President Obama said, well, history doesn't travel in a straight line, it zigs and zags. Progress, he said, is bumpy. That was his word. And it's funny, I listened to the president's 2016 speech at Rutgers recently on YouTube, and his tone, in light of what was ahead, seemed to underestimate the perils. In a few months' time, we all would discover just how violently history can zig or zag. Suddenly things didn't feel bumpy, not bumpy as he had it. They felt violently out of control. It felt as though we had fallen off a historical cliff. Soon we would be waking each morning not to the kind of fitful progress that President Obama had described, but to Twitter storms of rage from the White House bedroom. The deliberate inflammation of division and resentment, a complete disregard for what is true and what is false. An American president was capable of calling climate change a Chinese conspiracy theory. We witnessed the abrogation of treaties, the humiliation of allies, the warm embrace of autocrats. In short, the arc of the moral universe was no longer bending toward justice. In 1998, the philosopher Richard Rorty had warned of something like this in a book he wrote called Achieving Our Country. Something, he wrote, will crack. The non-suburban electorate will decide that the system has failed and start looking around for a strong man to vote for, someone willing to assure them that once he's elected, the smug bureaucrats, the tricky lawyers, the overpaid bond salesmen, and the postmodernist professors, like you guys, will no longer be calling the shots. One thing that is very likely to happen is that the gains made in the past 40 years, he said, by Black and brown Americans and by homosexuals will be wiped out. Contempt for women will come back in fashion. In other words, Rorty said in 1998, he predicted the harsh populism that took hold. in the years we've just lived through. While you've been studying here, you've lived through a hard passage of history. Think about all we've witnessed and all we've been through lately. There are times with a pandemic, the overheating of a planet, the incessant acts of racial and social injustice like we just saw in Buffalo, with the brutal invasion of Ukraine. There are times when it seems like the troubling news is just too much. It's too relentless. And the question that you face is the question that any thinking person always faces when history is at a moment of crisis. What business is this of mine? What can I possibly do about it? It's beyond my reach. Can't I just get on with my life? And can't you, Mr. Graduation Speaker, just let me enjoy my commencement in peace? I get it. Today is commencement, a day of beginning, and in the past 4 years, all of you in one way or another have deepened your potential, not only to help yourselves and those you love, but to help the world beyond, a world that seems sometimes beyond your reach. You can do it. You can. Think about it. You've studied sciences in ways that can result in healing the sick and developing new technologies to improve our air and our seas. You've studied engineering, which might lead to more efficient buildings and more modern transportation. You might even rebuild New Jersey Transit. If so, God bless you. You've studied other cultures, opened your minds to other ways of thinking and feeling. You've held debates in your classes and on Zoom with teachers and students who don't necessarily see things the way you do. And you've learned to listen, to think, to doubt, sometimes even to have the courage to change your mind. Many of you have taken part in volunteer programs, and you've given of your hearts and that most precious commodity, your time. You've helped the hungry and the unhoused, the disabled and the disadvantaged. And so in these years at Rutgers, whether you realize it or not, you've deepened your capacity to not only make it in this world, but to make the world new, to change things, to bend things toward justice. All of you have a stake in the future of freedom, in helping to strengthen what now seems fragile. The thing is, you're not free when you're poor or sick or lacking access to education. You're not free in the face of impending environmental disaster. Globalism is not about the ubiquity of the iPhone. It's more profound. It's about the intensification of common responsibility. And this means that the future of freedom enlists and implicates pretty much everyone, particularly people of talent like you, particularly people fortunate enough to have gotten an excellent education like you have here. And that means all of you at Rutgers, the class of 2022. There's no life of freedom without some sense of communal responsibility. You are very much needed in the larger world, and not merely to earn, to shop, and take up space. Building and predicting and perfecting a free society is not only a matter of high politics, it's built out of contributions great and small. The reason so many revolutions in the name of liberty finally disappoint relates to an absence of the small civil structures, mental habits, habits of discourse and decency that also nurture freedom. So what you do in your daily lives helps to create a free society, a generous society. And that's why I'm so proud to be here with you today, because not only are we here to celebrate the accomplishments of your years at Rutgers, but to anticipate the astonishing things that you'll do in the greater world, a world that's long been imagined and the one that you richly, at long last, deserve. Thank you very much.